a Navy officer alone in the Blue Ridge. A dying dog bursts from the dark, not attacking, not fleeing. She locks eyes, then does something no feral animal ever does. She waits. If you want to know what she was protecting, subscribe and stay with me. The Blue Ridge Mountains in November don't forgive. They don't soften their edges for anyone. Not for the hikers who underestimate them in October. And certainly not for the woman now moving alone through their frozen interior, 20 miles from the nearest marked trail, her breath coming out in short white plumes that the wind snatched away before they could form anything permanent. Chief Petty Officer Maya Razor Caldwell had always respected things that didn't apologize for what they were. The mountains, the ocean, the job. She pulled her coyote tan tactical jacket tighter against a gust that cut down from the ridge like something personal. Her boots finding purchase on a shelf of frost-slicked granite without her eyes needing to look down. After 11 years of naval special warfare, her body knew how to move through hostile terrain the way other people knew how to breathe automatically, efficiently without asking permission from the mind. The mind was the problem. The mind was exactly what she had come up here to outrun. Patrick County, Virginia had been her answer when she needed somewhere to go that wasn't a hospital waiting room, wasn't a base commander's office, and wasn't the apartment in Virginia Beach where the walls had started pressing inward at 3 in the morning. She had driven 4 hours from Dam Neck, in the dark parked her F-250 at a trailhead that saw maybe 30 visitors a year, shouldered her pack, and walked until the cell signal died. That had been 2 days ago. The notification on her phone, the one she hadn't deleted but also hadn't responded to, was from Naval Special Warfare Command's Medical Review Board. She had read it enough times that she could recite it without looking. Chief Petty Officer Caldwell. Based on imaging results from your September evaluation, the rotator cuff damage sustained during the Yemen operation has progressed beyond the threshold for conservative management. The board strongly recommends surgical intervention within the next 30 days. Failure to comply will result in a mandatory fitness re-evaluation and likely reassignment to a non-operational billet. Likely reassignment. She had spent 11 years building the NSW-K9 integration program from a secondary capability into something operators actually trusted with their lives. She had trained dogs that found IEDs in Fallujah and Syria. She had put working dogs into the hands of SEAL teams in environments where one missed scent meant a body bag. The program was her, and a desk in a building somewhere in Coronado was not. The deadline to submit her decision was 72 hours from the moment she had left Virginia Beach. She was now 48 hours in. Maya stopped at the crest of a secondary ridge and set her pack down, rolling her right shoulder slowly against the familiar deep ache that had been her constant companion since September. The movement sent a bright wire of pain down her arm that she acknowledged, and then filed away the same way she had learned to file away every inconvenient physical fact about herself in the field. Below her, the Blue Ridge unrolled in every direction in shades of iron and grey, the bare November trees clawing at a sky that promised more cold and nothing else. It was brutal and enormous, and completely indifferent to her situation, and that was precisely why she had come. She unzipped the side pocket of her pack and pulled out the folded paper, not her phone, but an actual printed copy she had made before leaving, because some things deserve to be held in your hands. The Medical Review Board notification was soft at the folds, already showing the damage of being opened and closed 100 times in 2 days. She held it without reading it. The wind lifted one corner. She pressed it flat against her palm. For a long moment, Maya Razor Caldwell, who had coordinated K9 assets in 4 combat theaters, who had carried a 60-pound dog out of a burning vehicle in Kandahar without putting it down, sat on a ridge in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and did not know what to do. She refolded the paper. She put it back in her pocket. She picked up her pack. She kept moving north, along the ridge, away from the trail. Deeper into the... She heard it at 1,640 hours, 40 minutes before the light would fail completely. A single dry crack, the sharp, clean snap of a branch breaking under applied weight. Not wind stress, not a falling limb. It came from her left, maybe 20 feet, into the dense wall of rhododendron that choked the slope below the ridgeline. And it was close enough that Maya's nervous system responded before her brain had finished processing the sound. Her center of gravity dropped. Her right hand moved to the fixed blade knife on her chest rig. She went still. In this part of Virginia, that particular sound signature meant black bear, white-tailed deer pushing through cover or something feral, and stressed enough not to care about making noise. She ran through the options in one clean second the way NSW training had permanently rewired her threat assessment process, catalogued the variables, and waited. The rhododendron wall was thick enough that she couldn't see more than 3 feet into it. She could hear something moving, the specific quality of displacement that came from a body low to the ground, moving fast, moving toward her. Maya exhaled slowly through her nose. She did not draw the knife. Whatever was in those bushes was not moving like a predator. It was moving like something desperate. The rhododendron exploded outward. Maya braced. What came through the wall of branches was not a bear. It was a dog. A German shepherd, or something that had once been one. The architecture of the breed was still visible beneath the damage. The long muzzle, the deep chest, the intelligent triangular ears, but everything else was wrong. The dog was emaciated in a way that made Maya's chest constrict on sight, ribs pressing visibly against a coat that was matted with frozen mud and dark blood in long dried streaks that had been there long enough to oxidize brown. She moved on all 4 legs, but the rear left carried almost nothing, the hip dropping with each stride in the specific compensatory pattern Maya recognized from working dogs with pelvic injuries. She was starving, and she looked at her. That was what stopped everything. The dog looked at her. Not the way a frightened animal looks at a human with the flat, white-rimmed panic of something that has lost the capacity to reason. She looked at Maya the way a person looks at the only other person in the room, with recognition, with assessment, with something that could only be called intention. She held Maya's gaze for 3 full seconds, then let out a sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a cry, something in between. Something that carried in it a specific frequency of urgency that Maya had only heard once before from a handler in Kandahar who had been separated from his dog for 18 hours and found him injured and alive. Then she crossed the remaining distance and put herself against Maya's chest with a precision that was not desperation. The dog placed her weight deliberately enough to make contact, enough to communicate, not enough to destabilize. She pressed her cold, wet muzzle into the side of Maya's neck, and she trembled her whole body, shaking with a fine, continuous vibration that was not cold and not fear, but something that had been held in too long and was now releasing, against the first solid thing it had found. Maya caught her. She ran a gloved hand down the dog's spine and felt every vertebra standing out like a row of stones under water. "Easy," Maya said quietly. "I've got you. Easy." She registered the collar, heavy-duty tactical nylon, the kind NSW and federal law enforcement used for working dogs, frayed nearly to failure. She registered the D-ring, the short severed length of climbing rope still attached to it. She registered the way the dog held herself, the controlled weight placement, the direct eye, contact, the deliberate quality of her stillness. And she knew with the certainty that came from 11 years of working alongside K-9 units, that she was not looking at a lost animal. She was looking at a trained operator who had found the right person and was waiting for her to catch up. Maya eased the dog back just enough to examine the collar without breaking contact, entirely keeping one hand against the animal's flank because she could feel the precise moment the trembling would spike if the warmth disappeared. The collar was NSW grade, No question. She had ordered enough of them to recognize the hardware, the reinforced stitching, the specific weight of the metal D-ring, the width of the nylon webbing designed to hold under conditions that would destroy a civilian dog collar without effort. This one had been through conditions. The fraying wasn't age or wear. It was stress fracture. The kind that happened when the material had been pulled against a fixed point repeatedly over days. Not hours. Maya checked the inner left ear, tilting the dog's head with 2 fingers under the jaw, and found what she was looking for. The tattoo was faded but legible. K9, 812 Sierra. She went still for a moment that had nothing to do with caution. K9, 812 Sierra. She had read that designation in a field integration report 2 years ago, when she was still processing after-action documentation from a joint NSW contractor exercise in Bahrain. The report had logged a working dog, K9, 812, Sierra German Shepherd, female, handler assigned to Ironclad Defense Group under a DoD contractor agreement as having independently flagged a simulated IED scenario that 4 human operators had cleared. The dog had reapproached the target vehicle 3 times, despite handler recall commands, refusing to stand down until the exercise coordinator ordered a secondary sweep that found the prop device the human team had missed. 14 personnel in the simulation. The report had filed it under exceptional K9 performance and closed the record with a transfer notation times asset transferred to Ironclad Defense Group. Full custody. Maya had noted it at the time because exceptional was an understatement, and she had wondered then what happened to dogs like that inside private contractor systems where DoD oversight didn't follow them. Now she was looking at the answer. She sat back on her heels and looked at the dog for a long moment, and the dog looked back with the steady, focused attention of an animal that understood it was being evaluated and was cooperating with the process. "You were in Bahrain," Maya said, not as a question. The dog's ears came forward. The right one had a small notch at the tip, damage from something sharp, healed long ago. Her brown eyes were clear despite everything her body had been through. That mattered. Cognitive coherence, under extreme physical stress, was what separated a working dog from a pet, and this dog was coherent. She was exhausted and starving and hurt, and she was thinking. Then the dog did something that settled everything. She dropped her eyes from Maya's face, took 3 deliberate steps toward the dense brush she had emerged from, stopped, and looked back over her shoulder. She waited 2 seconds, making sure Maya was watching, then pushed her nose toward the interior of the slope and let out one sharp, clipped bark. Not a distress bark, a directional alert. Maya had heard that exact bark in training scenarios 100 times. It meant times. There is something here that requires your attention, and I am telling you where it is. Show me, Maya said. Her voice dropped to the register she used in the field. Not loud, not soft, just level, and clear, the tone that told a working dog it had a handler again. The shepherd's ears flattened forward. She turned and went back into the rhododendron without hesitation, her injured hip hitching with every stride, her ribs working hard against the exertion she had no reserves left for. Maya checked the angle of the light. The dog's coat, despite everything, was still faintly warm at the belly. She had not been running long. 2 hours away from the nest, at most, Maya estimated. The puppies had been fed before she left. Nova had timed her departure. Maya pulled her jacket back up, tightened her pack straps, and followed. The terrain dropped away almost immediately. What had looked from the ridge like a continuous slope was actually a series of broken shelves that fell steeply toward a hidden ravine floor, the kind of geography that didn't show on a standard topo map because the contour lines ran together at the scale most hikers used. Maya had brought a 124,000 USGS quad sheet. She had not been expecting a ravine this deep, this far off the secondary ridge. The dog moved ahead of her with a precision that was painful to watch, not because she was slow, but because the effort of that precision was visible in every stride. The rear left hip dropped and hitched in a rhythm that Maya's own body began to anticipate and wince at. But the dog did not stop. She did not hesitate at the edge of each drop-off, the way an uncertain animal would. She went over them with the controlled commitment of something that had already calculated the risk and decided the destination was worth it. Maya followed, using exposed roots as handholds on the steeper sections, feeling the cold working through her jacket now that she was out of the windbreak of the ridge. Once she nearly went down on a section of ice-slick leaf litter, her right boot skidding sideways before she caught herself on a birch trunk. And the dog stopped, immediately turned and waited. Not anxiously. Not with the frantic back and forth of a dog that had lost its handler. She just stopped and waited, her brown eyes tracking Maya's recovery, with an attention that was professional in its patience. When Maya found her footing and nodded a gesture she made without thinking the same acknowledgement she gave a working dog in the field. The shepherd turned and continued. She was checking her back trail. Every 30 seconds. Without breaking stride, her head turned and her eyes swept back to confirm Maya was still there. If Maya slowed on a difficult section, the dog slowed. The synchronization was not accidental. It was trained. At one point, navigating a section where 3 possible routes diverged around a cluster of large boulders, Maya watched the dog make a choice. Not the easiest route, not the most direct line, but the one with the most stable footing for a bipedal following behind her. She selected the path that worked for 2 different kinds of bodies. Maya paused for 2 seconds at the divergence point and looked at the trail markers. Claw marks, light deliberate, scraped into the soft bark of a tulip poplar at the junction. She crouched and examined them. Fresh, the same, on a second tree, farther along. The dog had marked the route. Not just now, not as a byproduct of movement. She had marked it on her way out, going the other direction, coming to find help. She had created a recoverable trail before she ever found a person to follow her back down it. Maya stood and looked at the dog, waiting 15 feet ahead of her, and she felt something shift in her chest that wasn't sentiment and wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She had spent 11 years training dogs to think 3 steps ahead, in environments where thinking 3 steps ahead was the difference between an operator going home and an operator not going home. She knew what deliberate contingency behavior looked like. She knew what it cost, a body running on nothing to execute it. This dog had been alone, in pain, starving in labor, and she had planned. 40 minutes into the descent, the ravine floor leveled, and the dense canopy thinned slightly. Through the grey mesh of bare branches, Maya saw it, a collapsed structure low against the rock face, almost entirely consumed by decades of ivy and deadfall. What was left of the roofline had caved inward. The walls still stood barely. The whole thing looked like the mountain was slowly taking it back. The dog stopped at the threshold of what had once been a doorway and looked back at Maya one more time. The brown eyes held something that Maya would have hesitated to name in any report in any professional context, but here, 20 miles from anything, in the fading light of a November afternoon in the Blue Ridge, she named it anyway. Relief. The air inside hit Maya before her eyes adjusted. Damp earth, decaying timber. And underneath both of those, the copper-sharp smell of blood that her nostrils catalogued before her brain made the connection. She clicked on her tactical light and swept it across the interior. The floor had partially given way in 2 places, exposing the dark clay subgrade beneath. The walls held decades of moisture in their grain. In the far corner, where two collapsed sections of flooring had fallen together to form a low, unintentional shelter, her light found them. 3 German shepherd puppies pressed together in a pile so small it looked like a single animal, at first black fur, trembling without pause, the thin, high sound of their breathing, audible now that she was listening for it. They were no more than 4 days old. Maya estimated young enough that their eyes had not yet opened, but old enough that they had learned to conserve warmth by staying pressed together. Their bodies had that specific, translucent fragility of newborns that were losing the fight against cold, not dead, but moving in that direction, with the quiet inevitability of a tide going out. The mother dog went to them, immediately pushing her muzzle into the pile-licking faces and flanks, with a focused urgency that was both maternal and medical, stimulating circulation, confirming warmth, accounting for each one. Maya did the count. 3. She moved her light in a slow sweep of the corner, and stopped when it caught the cast-iron wood stove. It was massive, the kind that had been built into mountain cabins 100 years ago. All black iron and utilitarian weight now lying on its side where the rotted floorboards beneath it had finally surrendered. The edge of it rested against the clay subgrade, less than 2 feet from the puppy nest. Maya looked at it, and then looked at the mother dog. And the mother dog was not nursing. She was digging. Her front paws were working at the earth beside the fallen stove, with a focused desperation that had moved past urgency into something closer to mechanical, the kind of repetitive effort that a body makes when it has stopped asking whether it has enough left to continue. Her paws were bleeding. The torn skin on her pads left small dark prints in the frozen dirt. Maya crossed the room in 4 steps and dropped to her knees beside the stove, putting her light on the gap between the iron edge and the subgrade. Her stomach dropped. A 4th puppy was there, smaller than the others, pressed into a shallow depression in the clay, its hindquarters pinned under the edge of the stove. It was alive. She could see the shallow movement of its ribs, but its body temperature was failing. The skin around its muzzle was almost white. She pulled her light back and assessed the stove the way she had been trained to assess a vehicle that needed moving in a landing zone weight, angle center of gravity failure modes. Cast iron, century-old construction, dense metal. She estimated 90 to 110 kilos. The iron was old, hollow cast in sections, not solid. The roofline collapse had shifted its weight distribution. She would not need to lift the full mass, only lever the near edge up far enough to clear the puppy's hindquarters. If she lifted from the wrong point, the whole mass would shift laterally. A lateral shift meant the edge moved inward instead of up. She needed a lever and a fulcrum. She swept her light across the debris and found a section of collapsed ceiling beam, oak old growth, dense and straight. She dragged it to the stove, working quickly and quietly, her breath coming hard in the cold air. For the fulcrum, she used a stack of the flat river stones that had been part of the old chimney base, stacked, tight, tested for stability with her boot. She set the lever, positioned her hands, and paused. She looked at the mother dog. "Back," she said, in the same level-field voice she had used outside. "Get back." The shepherd understood the command instantly and retreated 3 steps, but her eyes never left the gap beneath the stove. Her flanks were heaving with effort even in stillness. Maya wrapped both hands around the oak beam and took one breath. She felt the right shoulder register what was about to happen, a deep, preemptive throb that traveled down the arm and pooled in the joint where the imaging had shown the most damage. She registered it the same way she registered everything in the field that couldn't be changed. Noted, filed, irrelevant to the next 10 seconds. She drove down on the lever. The oak flexed under the load with a sound like a low groan. The iron didn't move for a long moment, then it shifted, the edge lifting a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, a full inch, the fulcrum stones grinding against each other under the redistributed weight. 2 inches. 3. Maya's teeth were together, her breath expelled, and held her vision narrowing at the edges the way it did at the top end of a maximal effort. The right shoulder sent a signal up her spine that was not a twinge and not a warning. It was a tearing heat that started at the joint and spread outward in a way she had felt once before, in Yemen. And she knew with clinical certainty that something in there had given way, and that the full accounting of it would come later. In a hospital, not here. She kept pushing. Now, she said through her teeth. The mother dog was already moving. She crossed the distance in one stride, ducked her head into the gap with the careful precision of a dog that knew exactly what she was doing, found the 4th puppy by the scruff, and pulled. Not dragging, not yanking, but lifting with the delicate, specific tension that experienced mothers used, and that Maya had seen working dogs apply to injured handlers in field training. One clean motion. The puppy came free. The second the dog cleared the edge, Maya released the beam. The iron stove dropped back into the clay with a concussion that sent vibration through the floor and up through Maya's knees. She sat back against the wall, her right arm hanging at her side, the shoulder locked in a sustained protest that she gave herself exactly 4 seconds to feel before she pushed off the wall and went to the corner. The mother had carried the 4th puppy to the nest and set it down. She was nudging it with her nose insistent rhythmic, and it wasn't responding. Maya moved her aside with 2 fingers under the jaw. The same 2-finger contact she always used, so as not to alarm a stressed working dog, and picked up the puppy. It was cold in a way that was different from the others. Not ambient cold, internal cold, the temperature of a body that had stopped generating its own heat. She put 2 fingers against the tiny sternum and found a heartbeat that was there in the way. A candle flame is there in a wind present, intermittent on the edge of knot. She looked around the cabin once, then did the only thing that made sense. She unzipped her jacket, pulled it off the cold, hitting her shoulders immediately, the crop top beneath, doing nothing against November in Virginia, and unbuttoned the thermal layer underneath. She placed the puppy directly against her sternum, over her heartbeat, and zipped the jacket back up over both of them. With her left hand inside the jacket, she began compressions with her thumb light, rhythmic. The pediatric rate her combat medic training had burned into muscle memory. Her right arm she kept, still against her side, the shoulder locked, in a way she could not afford to think about yet. With her right moving only from the elbow down, keeping the shoulder immobile, she covered the puppy's muzzle and delivered small, careful puffs of warm breath. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. The mother dog sat at her knee and did not move. After 40 seconds, she did something that made Maya pause for half a breath. She began licking Maya's left wrist in a steady rhythm. 30 contacts per minute. The correct compression rate for a canine resuscitation assist. She had been trained for exactly this scenario, a handler performing CPR, needing a pacer. She was pacing. Maya felt her throat close around something that was not a sound. She kept going. At the 4-minute mark, there was nothing. At 4 minutes 30 seconds, there was nothing. A rooftop in Kandahar moved through her mind like weather, a teammate, a helicopter that was still 12 minutes out, hands that eventually went still under hers. She refused the memory, the same way she had refused it every night since. At 5 minutes and 11 seconds, the puppy moved. A single spasm, the whole small body contracting at once. Then a gasp, thin and ragged and absolutely real. Then another. Then a third. Maya unzipped her jacket and looked down. The puppy was moving its front legs in the rooting pattern of a newborn looking for warmth. Its nose was twitching. She placed it carefully back into the nest alongside its siblings. The mother dog curled her entire body around all four of them, in one motion, a slow, controlled fold that ended with her chin resting on the edge of the pile, her eyes closing for exactly 3 seconds before they opened again and found Maya's. Maya was sitting on the dirt floor of a ruined cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains with her jacket half open and her right shoulder sending a signal she was going to have to deal with eventually. She was not crying, but the back of her throat ached with something she didn't name, and she sat there in the cold and let it be there. She gave herself 5 minutes. She fed the mother the last 2 protein bars from her pack, broken into pieces, and offered flat-palmed the way you offered food to a dog that had learned not to trust quick movements, and she refilled her collapsible bowl from her canteen and watched the dog drink with the single-minded intensity of something that had been thirsty for days. Then she pulled her tactical light and went back to the collar. She had been operating on priority triage since she arrived. Stabilize first, understand second. Now she understood. She examined the D-ring slowly. The length of attached rope was approximately 6 inches. The end, clean cut, not frayed, not gnawed but severed with a sharp edge. Professional-grade dynamic climbing rope, the kind a technical climber or a military-trained operator would carry. She traced the cut end with her thumb and confirmed what she already suspected. The cut was on the rope, not at the collar. Someone had cut the rope to remove the evidence of the tether, not to free the dog. She stood and went to the main support beam of the north wall, where the ivy was thickest. She peeled the growth back in sections until she found at the other end of the rope, secured to the beam with a bowline knot that was textbook perfect. Not a square knot, not a half hitch. A bowline, the knot that didn't slip under load, that wouldn't loosen under sustained pulling, that required deliberate hand technique to tie correctly. Whoever had secured this dog to this beam had known exactly what they were doing and had done it with the specific intention of making escape impossible. Maya stood at the beam for a moment with her light on the knot, doing the math. A pregnant working dog with a hip injury. Alone, tied with a no-slip knot to a structural beam inside a hidden collapsing cabin 20 miles from any road. Then she looked at the dog. She looked at the point on the wall 12 inches above the beam, where a century-old nail had worked halfway out of the timber and stopped, its head protruding at a right angle. The iron nail was new shiny on one side. The finish had been worn away in a narrow band around the shaft, the specific pattern of repeated friction from something soft and strong pulling across it, again and again, over a period of days. Maya crouched and examined the nail. She looked at the dog's paws, at the raw skin on the pads, at the specific placement of the damage, not on the bottoms where a running dog sustained wear, but on the leading edges and the tops. She reconstructed it in the same way she reconstructed any problem in the field, working backward from physical evidence. The bowline was too strong to bite through. The collar was military-grade nylon, nearly impossible to chew. But the rope itself, if leveraged against a sharp fixed point at the right angle, would abrade. It would take days. It would require the dog to find the right tool, the nail, and understand that sustained mechanical friction could accomplish what brute force couldn't. It would require patience and intention and the capacity to continue working toward a goal while simultaneously giving birth and keeping 4 newborns alive in a collapsing cabin in November. Maya turned the brass tag over. Ironclad Defense Group. Handler R. Harmon. She knew Ironclad. She knew them because they had offered her a position after Yemen K-9 program director. Substantial compensation. The kind of offer that looked generous until you understood what it was actually purchasing. She knew them because K-9, 812 Sierra, had been transferred to them with DoD approval and had then effectively ceased to exist in any system she could access. She stood in the dark cabin with the light on the tag and felt the pieces settle into place with the specific weight of things that had always been true, waiting to be found. Nova moved first. 3 minutes before Maya heard anything before there was anything to hear, as far as human senses were concerned, the dog's body changed. The nursing stopped. The ears came up and rotated, locking forward. Her ribcage slowed as her breathing shifted from resting to controlled. She lowered herself without standing, pressing her belly toward the floor, her weight redistributing to her haunches in a pattern. Maya recognized as the alert and hold position a K9 took when it had detected a target and was waiting for handler direction. Maya's hand went to her knife without conscious instruction. She clicked off her light. In the dark, she listened, and after 20 seconds, she heard it, the low mechanical growl of a 4-stroke ATV engine, distant, working down a grade coming from the northeast. She processed the 3-minute gap between Nova's alert and her own detection. The dog had read ground vibration through her paws, through the clay floor, through the specific frequency that a vehicle on a rough mountain track produced well below the threshold of human hearing. She had given Maya 3 minutes. Maya used them. She moved to the thickest section of standing wall to the left of the doorway, pressed her back to the timber and became still. She tightened her jacket and settled her breathing to the long, slow rhythm of a person who was waiting, not a person who was afraid. The engine cut. Boots on frozen leaves, deliberate, unhurried. Someone who had walked this specific ground before and was not concerned about what he would find. A light swept the doorway. The man who stepped through was broad, experienced-looking, wearing Gore-Tex tactical gear with an ironclad chest rig that matched the tag on Nova's collar. He held a Glock with a suppressor and weapon-mounted light, and he moved into the cabin the way trained people moved into uncertain spaces, light, sweeping. Center waited ready. He found Nova with his beam and stopped. "Well," Rex Harmon said, and the amusement in his voice was the specific kind that came from the total absence of anything that recognized another living thing as significant. Still breathing, he raised the Glock. "Vanguard's sorry ironclad's auditors are coming through Tuesday. Can't have a loose end." Nova did not move. She stood directly in front of the nest, body between the pistol and her puppies, growling at a frequency that Maya felt in her chest. Maya came out of the shadow and took the suppressor with her left hand, redirecting the barrel to the ceiling as the weapon discharged with a muffled crack. Her left forearm found Harmon's throat, simultaneously driving him back into the doorframe. He was trained and recovered fast, throwing a hard left into her right side. The impact traveled straight to the shoulder, and she felt something white and bright run down her arm from the joint. The arm was functional, but the grip strength on the right was gone. She worked one-handed for the rest of it. She stepped inside his next swing, executed a leg sweep that her NSW hand-to-hand instructor had drilled into her for 300 repetitions until it happened without thought, and they went down hard into the clay floor. Harmon was strong and furious and fighting for the weapon with both hands. Maya was a Naval Special Warfare K9 integration officer who had spent 11 years in environments where losing was not an available outcome. She got the gun arm trapped under her knee, drove the base of her palm into the bridge of his nose, with the controlled force of someone who knew exactly how much was enough, felt the bone give, and watched the Glock drop. She picked it up. She cleared the chamber and ejected the magazine and threw the components into the dark outside in separate directions. Then she grabbed Harmon by the collar and dragged him upright. Under her hands, with his nose bleeding and his options catalogued and dismissed one by one, Harmon said nothing useful for the first 2 minutes. He was trained for silence. She could see it in the way his jaw set and his eyes went flat. What he was not trained for was the specific quality of stillness she brought to the room after she picked up the Glock, not threatening, not performing, just the absence of any urgency that suggested she needed anything from him at all. It was the stillness of someone who already had enough. He broke on the breeding operation first, because he thought it was the least of it, then the auditors because he needed her to understand the timeline, then the hip injury and the 25,000 per puppy, because by then he was building a case for himself that diminished his own role, making ironclad the architecture and himself a small piece inside it. He did not tell her about the 2 other dogs in Kentucky and Tennessee. He told her about the Kentucky facility, only framing it as the primary site, attempting to redirect her attention there. She noted the gap, the specific shape of what a person omits when they are managing disclosure, and she said nothing. She would give that gap to Dale Owens and let the federal system find the rest. Maya listened to all of it. Then she tied him to the beam with his own climbing rope, using a bowline knot that wouldn't loosen under sustained pulling, and left him there. She worked fast because the temperature was dropping and the puppies had already spent too long in it. She emptied her pack on the cabin floor and assessed what she could leave most of it. She kept the trauma kit, 2 liters of water, the emergency rations and the satellite phone. Everything else went on the dirt. She pulled her coyote tactical jacket off and spread it flat, then used the knife to cut the lining at the seams, peeling it free in one insulated piece. She folded it into the bottom of the pack and shaped the sides up to form walls. She picked up the first puppy. It was warm. She placed it in the center of the fleece lining and felt it immediately root against the warmth. Second, third, the runt, last ghost. She thought without deciding to, lifting the smallest body with her left hand and steadying it against her chest. Feeling the heartbeat that had not been there 40 minutes ago now, steady against her palm. She placed it in the center of the nest with its siblings. She zipped the pack 3/4 closed, left a gap for airflow, and strapped it across her chest with the straps reversed, so the opening faced up and she could see in. Then she went to Nova. The dog had watched every step of the process from her position in the corner, tracking each puppy as it was lifted. Her tail moving in a slow, continuous arc, not happy, not distressed, but something between them, trusting and afraid of what trust cost, and doing it anyway. Maya crouched in front of her. "Come on," she said. Nova tried to stand. The rear left gave immediately, the hip dropping, and she went down on her side with a sound that was not loud but was very specific. The sound of something that had held on for a very long time and was now encountering the actual limit. Maya slid her left arm behind Nova's front legs and used her right forearm, not the hand. The grip strength was gone, as a brace beneath the dog's hips. The shoulder screaming at even that much, and lifted with everything she had left. 32 kilos of starving German Shepherd, which should have been 50. Nova, startled at the lift, went rigid for 1 second, then exhaled through her nose and put her head against Maya's shoulder. "I've got you," Maya said. "I've got all of you." The climb back out of the ravine took 2 hours. The math was simple and unpleasant. 45 pounds of dog in her arms, 15 pounds of puppies on her chest, 1 compromised shoulder, 0 visibility beyond her headlamp terrain that was objectively trying to kill her. She fell twice. The first time she caught herself on a root with her left hand and kept Nova from impacting the ground. The second time she went down on her knee and sat there for 10 seconds with the pain from the right shoulder going white at the edges of her vision. And Nova turned her head and looked at her from an inch away, and Maya got up. At the second major route divergence, where the terrain split around a rock formation and her light wasn't enough to identify the better path, Nova lifted her head from Maya's shoulder and turned it left. Just turned it slow and deliberate, looking at the left fork and then back at Maya. The left fork had better footing. Maya took the left fork. When the tree line broke, and she saw the reflection of her truck's taillights through the bare branches. She stopped walking for a moment and stood in the cold, dark, and breathed. She didn't have words for what she was feeling. She had never been good at words for feelings, which was part of why 11 years of operational service had suited her so well. She walked to the truck. She unlocked it and started the engine and put the heat on maximum and held her hand in front of the vent until it was warm. And then she reached into the pack and checked each puppy with that warm hand. 4 heartbeats, 4 warm noses. She arranged the lining carefully on the passenger seat and placed them in it. She laid Nova on the floor in front of the heater and watched the dog's eyes close, not unconscious, just finally at rest. Then she pulled out the satellite phone and called Dale Owens, who answered on the 3rd ring at 3 in the morning, the way only people who had been in the military answered phones immediately. Fully awake voice, already steady. "Hastings is dead, Razor. What's wrong?" "I need a squad out to the old logging road off mile marker 42, Maya said. "I have an ironclad contractor zip-tied to a beam. Arms modification, animal cruelty, federal contract fraud. I also have a K9 veteran and 4 puppies that need an emergency vet, and I need that before anything else." There was a 2-second pause. "Units are rolling," Dale said. She heard him moving boots on a floor. A door opening. He had been up. "How bad is the shoulder? How did you—" "Because Dale Owens reads medical review board notifications when they come through Patrick County Veterans Liaison channels," he said, "and yours came through 2 days ago. I've been waiting for you to call. Sit tight." By sunrise, Patrick County had more federal vehicles than it had seen in a decade. Sheriff Dale Owens's deputies had retrieved Rex Harmon from the cabin, hypothermic, furious and coherent enough to make statements that his lawyer would later advise him not to have made. Within 48 hours, FBI field agents working out of the Richmond office had opened a formal investigation into Ironclad Defense Group. The search warrants, 5 of them, covering the primary facility in Culpeper, Virginia, 2 satellite locations, and a pair of financial management accounts, took 11 days to execute the affidavits, running to 60 pages of supporting documentation that Maya spent 3 of 2 praise, those days helping to build from the evidence she had, recovered and photographed in the cabin. What they found when the warrants executed was what she had told them. They would find breeding records, financial statements, and a procurement fraud scheme that had been running for 6 years and had billed the Department of Defense for the blunt care and maintenance of working dogs that had been quietly disposed of. The contract funds redirected through a series of shell disbursements that the forensic accountants described in their official report as sophisticated and deliberate. The total figure exceeded $40 million. The CEO and 6 senior directors were arrested in the 3rd week. Rex Harmon, facing charges in 3 jurisdictions, entered into a cooperation agreement within 30 days. Maya did not follow any of this in real time, because she spent the first 18 hours of it on the floor of Dr. Patricia Nguyen's veterinary clinic in Harlan's Creek, refusing to sit in a chair. Dr. Nguyen had gone still when she saw the collar number, not the stillness of recognition, but the stillness of a person doing rapid math on something they had not expected to encounter. She worked without speaking for the first several minutes, her hands moving through the examination with the efficiency of someone who had done medicine in difficult conditions. Then, without looking up, she said, "I know this dog's record. I was at the Bahrain exercise review the IED scenario. The after-action report circulated through the military vet community because it was used as a training case for independent K9 judgment under contradictory handler commands." She paused, checking Nova's hip joint with careful pressure. "I've been following what happened to contractor-assigned dogs after transfer for 3 years. Nobody wanted to hear about it until now." She did not charge Maya for anything. When she came out of the treatment room after 3 hours and told Maya that Nova was stable, malnourished, Dehydrated, infected hip wound being managed but stable. Maya put her back against the wall and slid down it until she was sitting on the floor and did not say anything for a long moment. "Can I see her?" she said finally. "She's been asking for you," Dr. Nguyen said. Which was the kind of thing a person said when they meant it precisely. Nova was on a heated orthopedic pad with an IV in her foreleg, and the 4 puppies in a warming incubator 3 feet away, visible through the glass. When Maya came through the door, Nova's tail moved. Not the enthusiastic full-body response of a young dog, the measured, deliberate movement of an animal conserving energy and choosing to spend a small portion of it on this. Maya sat on the floor beside her and put her hand on Nova's head. Nova leaned into the palm and let out a slow breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long-held. "You did your job," Maya said quietly. "Now you're done." The Stars and Stripes piece ran 6 weeks later, written by a reporter who had covered military working dog policy for 4 years and understood the specific gap in Robbie's law that allowed contractor-assigned K9s to fall outside federal protection. The story of Nova, of what she had done alone in that cabin, of the 3-minute warning she had given, in the dark of the compression rate she had paced against a stranger's wrist, was picked up by every major outlet within 48 hours. The proposed amendment to Robbie's law, which would extend mandatory protection and independent oversight to all K9 assets operating under DoD contractor agreements, cleared committee in 90 days. Nova was the first dog registered under the amended statute. 3 months after that, on a morning in late February, when the Blue Ridge was showing the first pale green of early spring along its lower slopes, Maya stood on the porch of a cabin in Patrick County, with a mug of coffee in her left hand, because the right arm was 4 weeks out of surgery, and the physical therapist had been specific about what it was and was not cleared for. The appointment with NSW Command had been 2 weeks ago. The new billet, Director Naval Special Warfare K9, Integration and Training Command, a position that had been in the NSW organizational review pipeline for 14 months and had cleared its final funding authorization 3 weeks after. The ironclad warrants, executed, started in 6 weeks. The timing was not coincidence. Dale had told her on the phone that the investigation had broken a logjam that certain people had been waiting on. She did not ask which people. On the porch beside her, Nova sat in the early sun with her eyes half closed, her coat thick and black gold, and fully recovered, the scars on her pads visible only if you knew to look. In the yard below, a single large puppy was methodically dismantling a stick. Ghost, who had been small enough to fit in a jacket pocket and was now large enough to require 2 hands to lift, looked up at the noise of Maya's coffee mug and wagged once that same measured, deliberate wag that his mother used for things worth acknowledging, then went back to the stick. Maya had worked with a veteran K9 placement organization to find homes for the other 3. She had been specific about the requirements retired. Special operators cleared with land, with time, with the particular kind of understanding that came from having worked alongside a dog in conditions where the dog's judgment was the one you trusted. The placements had taken 3 weeks to finalize. At the handoff, Nova had watched each puppy leave. She had not cried, had not pulled, had not done any of the things a dog without training and experience might do when something it loved walked away. She had watched them go with the steady attention of something that understood the difference between loss and completion. Then she had come back to Maya and sat down, and that had been that. Maya drank her coffee. The mountain was turning green below the tree line. Ghost found something more interesting than the stick and abandoned it without ceremony, bounding across the yard toward the fence line with the specific lack of coordination of a dog who had not yet learned that his back legs existed. Nova watched him from the porch without moving, and Maya watched Nova, and none of them were anywhere other than exactly where they were. She had come up here in November to decide something. She had not decided it. It had been decided for her, or perhaps it had been decided so long ago that the November decision had only been the last piece catching up with everything that had already been true. She thought about a bowline knot tied in the dark by hands that knew what they were doing, about a dog who had found a nail in the dark and understood that patience and a fixed point and enough days could undo almost anything. About a puppy who had taken its first breath against her heartbeat, and whose heartbeat now moved through the yard below her in 4 paws and a wagging tail. She had come to the mountains to find silence. Instead, she had found something louder and more permanent. Not a decision, not a direction, but the specific feeling of being in the right place. She took a sip of coffee. Nova leaned against her leg without looking up. Below them, Ghost found the stick again and declared victory. The Blue Ridge held all of it, the way it held everything, without comment, without judgment, without any particular interest in whether the people inside it understood what they had found. Maya understood. She finished her coffee and went inside to start the day. If this story moved, you hit like and subscribe. So, stories like Nova's never get buried. Tell me, in the comments, which moment hit you hardest? And where in the world are you watching from?